dual nationality, Italian, Argentinian, and I am a correspondent for CBS News. Maybe some of you have heard CBS. So CBS News is one of the main American television news channels. It is trusted, a reliable source of information, providing breaking news for national and world news. It is not only a television network, it is also a radio broadcaster. So it does radio programming at a national level. It also has a website, which many of you may know. It was founded in 1927 in Chicago. So CBS News has existed for 95 years. So we're coming up to our 100th anniversary. It has a number of shows that maybe some of you, I don't know if any of you have been to the US, you may have. So it does obviously, the morning news, the evening news, which is very well known, and very popular magazine shows, 60 Minutes. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. It's the #1 investigative news program in the United States. It also has another very, very popular program, also on a Sunday, which is Sunday morning. It's broadcast in the morning. And it has also a show called 48 Hours that basically deals in murder and mysteries. It is very, very popular, and some of you may recall the case of Amanda Knox in Italy. Amanda Knox was a student at Perugia University, and there was a very big case in which a young student from the UK was killed. Her name was Meredith Kercher. Amanda Knox, who was American and living with her, was accused of that murder, along with three other people. And that happened in November 2007. So I covered that story for 7 years. Amanda Knox ended up in prison along with her boyfriend, Raffaele Sollecito, for 4 years. And then in an appeals trial was acquitted. She went back to the United States, but the case went on for another 3 years because in the Italian system, you have 3 degrees of justice. So primo grado, then appello, and then Cassazione, which is the equivalent of our high court. So until the high court doesn't exonerate you, the case is still going, pending basically. So finally, it's all over now. But anyway, for that show, 48 Hours of CBS, I did 3 hours of television just on the case of Amanda Knox. It was a very, very interesting case for the United States, and I covered it at length. But I basically now work for 60 Minutes, so the main television news program for CBS, and I work for Sunday Morning, and I do all the radio reporting from Italy. What does that mean? That means I can cover anything from the Pope and the Vatican to culture to, obviously we're without a government in this country, and there's a lot of bickering, and it's gonna take a while, I think, before we get a government in this country, at least not until next week. So there's plenty of things going on. So let me tell you a few other things before we go into the actual news and take a look at what the main coverage of events for CBS News is at the moment, okay? You'll see from the first page here, the front page of our website, that we have, in the States, they pay a lot of attention to what the presidents are doing, past and present. So in this case, there is still the case of Trump and, voter fraud that was alleged in the last elections, the last vote. And obviously coming up to midterm elections, this is a big conversation in the United States. Now, let me just also say something else. At any moment, if you want to ask me a question, please do. I'm not here to do a monologue, but you can participate. So if there's any questions, please just stop me and ask. Okay, now what I wanted to do, more than focus, as you'll see, there's also a case about Biden here. Okay, what happened here? Hang on, okay, I'm lost. Just bear with me a second. Okay, so as I was saying to you, a lot of issues regarding past and present presidents. So here, there's an issue about Biden's student debt relief plan. So things to do with the presidents are normally on the front page, okay? And it is in this case for us, at least with two pieces of news. Then there was a case yesterday that in front of Capitol Hill in Washington, as you'll see in the next story here, they recovered some guns. Now, guns, possession of guns outside, any state building is obviously a big problem. There's a huge debate about guns in the United States. And now, instead of sticking to, the US stories, I'd like to go into something that maybe you guys understand better, world news, and see how CBS is treating world news at the moment. Now, I want to go straight down to a story about our friend that you will recognize here. So it's not every day that there's a story about Italy in the news, but obviously this is a time of elections just been. Silvio Berlusconi has been in power in this country for a long time. And, whatever he says is obviously of great interest at the moment, particularly as we're going to have a government probably led by Giorgia Meloni. So, his comments that he made about Vladimir Putin and the Russian president and his links with him are obviously of interest to an international audience and to a US audience. So this is world news that would get covered by CBS, and particularly at a time where the biggest news is always the Ukraine at the moment. I mean, we have a war on our doorstep, and anything that is said about the situation in Ukraine is of interest. Now, the fact that Berlusconi said that recently it was Berlusconi's 86th birthday in September, towards the end of September, and he bragged about how he received from Vladimir Putin vodka. I mean, I don't think anybody cares what his birthday present from Putin is, but I don't think that the whole nation and the whole world need to know it. I mean, nothing against presents for your birthday, but at a time when Putin is waging war against the Ukraine, you kind of feel it's unnecessary, particularly at a time in this country where there's going to be a government which is going to be led by a right-wing coalition, and Berlusconi is going to be part of this government. So anything that is being said is being watched very closely. So I would say this is a particular time, and that is why it is being covered in this way by CBS News. It is not every day that you would find news about Italy on CBS. You could find news about the Vatican. The Vatican is something that is very well covered by American networks. Anything that the Pope is doing, particularly if he is traveling abroad, on a trip abroad, that would get covered by the major US networks. But let me go back a minute to show you what the first piece of news on the world page is. Now, it's about the Ukraine, of course. The US accusing Iran of selling drones to Russia in violation of a UN ban. Now, it appears that Russia has used at least more than 450 drones to carry out its bombings in the Ukraine. How do we know this? We know this because the Ukrainians have managed to shoot down more than 200, and it appears they have 50% of probability of shooting them down. So that gives us a figure of 450 that have been used, okay? So this is a big and huge problem. It's being discussed enormously at all levels. It was one of the first news stories at CBS Evening News last night. It's obviously a huge problem, and as I said, the war in the Ukraine has been major news on US networks since the start of the war. Another obviously very, very big piece of news is the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, we're coming up to, you know, close to 3 years in Europe and in the US. It is still considered a global health emergency, and you can read about it, but there is concern about a new variant, and here we have Dr. Anthony Fauci, President Biden's chief medical advisor, saying the spread of the new COVID variant, known as BQ1 and its descendant BQ11, have already grown to make up more than 10% of new infections against the US. So a huge problem, okay? Now, so Ukraine, big number one discussion. COVID-19, at the moment, as we've seen, there's been a little bit of Italian news only related to the Ukraine and Russia. There's an interesting story also further down I saw. Just to show you something, how important the Ukraine is. Here, Putin declares martial law in occupied Ukrainian regions. That's 4 different Ukrainian regions have martial law. So in the same newscast, they'll be talking about the Ukraine at different levels. So we see that the issue of the drones, the issue of martial law being imposed by the Russians in occupied Ukrainian regions, how Berlusconi has spoken about Putin, and that's also related to the Ukraine. So basically, the same issue is being treated in different ways with different aspects. But the reality of it is that it's all about the Ukraine and about this ongoing war that Russia is waging against it, and that is being dealt with by the whole world. Okay, so that's of major interest as far as world news are concerned. Then there is a story down here. Oh, another subject that is hugely treated by the US is Iran. And I mean, we saw the fact about the drones, that they've accused Iran of selling these drones to Russia for the Ukraine. But there is also a huge problem in Iran about its treatment of women at the moment. So here is an interesting story about an athlete that has returned to Tehran, and she was greeted by a cheering crowd because she, as I'll show you down here, she did not wear a mandatory headscarf. So when she competed at an event in South Korea. So she was greeted when she returned to Tehran by a cheering crowd, but of course, there are now fears for her safety. So Iran is something that the United States looks at very carefully, what is happening there, what they're doing. Obviously, Iran is no ally of the United States. So they watch very, very carefully what is going on there. The other news that I'd like to point out to you is other news from Europe, Europe, or maybe not so much Europe anymore, as the UK is now left Europe following the Brexit. But anyway, so the UK has inflation very, very high at the moment. It has had a change of government. The rate at the moment has matched the level in July. It's the highest in 40 years. This makes for big news from Europe, because the UK has instead been a very big ally of the United States in the past. And, what are the reasons for this problem of inflation? Well, similar to other countries in Europe, there are huge energy bills. This is a similar situation to what is being faced by Italy at the moment. I mean, we've had a triplication of energy bills. We have many companies that could end up having to close within the next month in this country. There are rising food bills. If you go to the market, everything has increased. There's a big debate also in this country as to whether there should be a situation that has been seen in France, where they put a limit on energy and it can't go any higher, and that the state has to do something about it and help the population. The problem is, obviously, it's a little bit difficult in this country until we have a government. So the debate goes on, and it will take some time before some resolution is found, although the soon-to-be prime minister, or who we think is going to be prime minister, has said that that is going to be one of the first things on the agenda that she will deal with. So really, these are, this is an example of how, CBS looks at world news. So what we see basically is a couple of stories from Europe, and then a lot on the Ukraine. And then we also see a couple of stories based on reports. For example, this one, the World Health Organization. These are kind of human interest. It's kind of human interest story. So the world warns the world to get active or risk developing serious illnesses. So it's just published a report. It's found that 500 million people can develop heart disease, obesity, diabetes, and other diseases if they don't increase their physical activity. It's obviously, everybody knows that we all should be moving much more. I mean, physical activity is good for our health. Now, a report like this is just there to underline and stress the absolute need for that, because with these kind of numbers, you can only understand that that's what needs to happen. So these reports are really to help people understand the scale of the problem. And like that report, I also noticed that there was another report, if I can find it, maybe not. Here we are. This is based on another report. It's about climate change. Another very big problem in the world today. So, obviously our health, climate change are issues that all of us should be concerned with. So here, what this report is saying is that, hang on a second, I don't know what this is. Let me move it. Okay, maybe not. So this report is saying that a warming climate could bring viruses in the Arctic in contact with, and cause a viral spillover, okay? So they've been studying and investigating how climate change may affect spillover risks. And they've been examining samples that have been taken in the Arctic. So what we've seen in this page of world news is that there's the big news, the Ukraine, covered with different news stories. Then we've seen a couple of stories from Europe, and then a couple of human interest stories on big issues, like what we've just said, climate change. We spoke about COVID and the health of human beings. So, a general world news page, that's how it's being covered by CBS News. It should make one reflect on this, right? Just what are the main interests of the people who are looking at the news today? Because as one prepares a world news page, one is thinking of what is of interest to my reader or to my audience, okay? So that's pretty much it, as far as I'm concerned, on how to cover world news events. It will be interesting, and I think, it's also interesting to compare different networks. So this is the CBS News, but you can go and see, and you'll find that NBC and ABC, which are the other two national networks in the United States, they will have similar coverage. It won't be very, very different. So it's always interesting to go to different news sources and have a look. And you guys are very lucky. Today we live in the age of, easy streaming of news in any language that you wanted. And so you guys could be attached to your phones, to your iPads, to whatever you want, and be able to access news. You also obviously have to be very, very careful with fake news. So how do you avoid fake news? Obviously, you go to a news source that you know is a trusted and reliable source, like CBS News. In this country, it has happened that, it's easy to tell the newspaper which side of the governing side they're on, if you like, or opposition. This happens in the United States as well, maybe to a lesser extent than in Italy. But certainly I don't think any country is immune from that. And obviously in countries where there are dictatorships, it gets much, much worse, and there is no freedom of, news content. It's very much watched. But then that's also a reason for having international organizations that check on what is being published. Okay, but in the age that we live in today, with such fast news coverage, it's easy to be reading something that may have no source at all. I mean, at CBS, we're not allowed to write about anything if we don't have at least 2 checked sources. So you will never see anything that is published that we haven't had to check twice. So that's why we consider ourselves reliable and trustworthy. Now, in the news that I do, let's move away a little bit from world news. So in my work for 60 Minutes, for example, that is a very, very important, as I said, the #1 investigative program in the United States. Now, there you could cover all sorts of different news, from an interview with the president, to a story about an athlete, to a story about the church, to a story about archaeology, anything. you could be doing. Now, my news pieces for them are 12 minutes. So it's called 60 minutes because that's an hour, but there are 3 segments of around 12 to 13 minutes, and the rest of the time is advertising in between the 3 segments. I do a lot of the stories from Italy. So what have I covered from Italy, just to give you an example and so that you can actually relate to it. So in November 12th of 2019, there was a huge flood in Venice, the highest water levels, the second highest water levels, in contemporary times. And the Venice Lagoon problem has long been debated, but at the time, the system of barriers that has been created, the Mose project, had still not been put into action. So I happened to be there on November 12th, believe it or not, at a party in a very lovely Venetian palazzo, and it was really kind of sad because we all had to be moved very quickly out of this place because it was impossible. I mean, you couldn't move in Venice. Now, that is a story about climate change. So after that, we did a story on the Venice Lagoon. The last story on the subject we had done in Venice was about the Mose barriers many, many years before. And so we looked at the fact that the Mose barriers hadn't been put into operation, and we had done a story 10 years before. So we looked at why this hadn't happened. And then in fact, now they are in operation and Venice is dry. So maybe what happened on that November 12th could have been avoided had the barriers been put in place before. So that's one story I've covered from Italy, but I'll tell you another very funny story, which I've just finished shooting, and it's not aired, so this is anteprima. It's about panini, not sandwiches, panini stickers, figurine panini. Okay, who knows the figurine panini? Oh, well, that's pretty good because you're all young here. So the figurine panini, what are they of? Do you know what the figurine panini are of? Very good, football players. But I'll tell you a story. There is a family called La Famiglia Panini, and they were the ones that started this business. When they first started the business, it was stickers of flowers. Nobody bought flower stickers. And so that immediately went down the drain, obviously. And then they started with the football players, and it was like a boom. And it's done so very, very well. And even though Italy is not in the World Cup this year, the world goes on even without Italy. But anyway, so there's the new album coming up for the World Cup, and there's all the figurine of all the football players of all the teams that are involved in the World Cup that this year is going to be for the first time in the Middle East. So it's also going to be a bit strange because of the time difference. Anyway, in some countries like Brazil, Argentina, you can't find a sticker anywhere. I mean, they are so popular that it's impossible. I mean, there are entire meetings of people who, children, adults, that meet up, go to parks, and they exchange stickers. And, one of the philosophies of the Panini company that no longer belongs now, incidentally, to the family, because they sold in 1988, but one of the interesting things about the Panini stickers, their idea, the Panini ideal, was that everybody who buys an album should have the possibility of finishing their album. So what they do is, sometimes you can't find the last one or the last five, but anyway, you can actually go and send them an email, request the football players that you are missing, and they will send them to you. So anyway, it's kind of a fun story for the World Cup. In fact, we're going to be airing our story, which we shot here. So the Panini family is from Modena. So we're going to be showing this. Don't you like my Panini story? Oh, when you were young, and you are still young. Yeah, you have albums at home. So I know a lot of people with albums. But I mean, I was kind of, I went obviously to film them, all the stickers coming out. And they still have the machines that were built for the first stickers. And the companies started making these stickers, I think, in 1969 or something like that. But anyway, so it's a fun story. So what I'm saying is that 60 Minutes, although it's a very good investigative show, does all sorts of stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to speak only about the Ukrainian war or about people, women, the situation of women in Afghanistan or in Iran, or starving people in some countries in Africa, but there can also be fun stories. Or as I said, I did the Venice Lagoon story. Okay, that is obviously a problem because it's about climate change. But, there's all sorts. I mean, once I did a story for them, just to give you another example, on the Vatican Library. So the Vatican Library is very difficult to get into. It's only for scholars. And it was it was closed for a year to have it refurbished. So what happened is that they don't allow anybody in with cameras whilst there's scholars in there. So I only had 3 days, which was in between the closures and all the works and the reopening, to do a story. So I had to negotiate a long time with Vatican officials, with the prefect and cardinals, to be able to be allowed in there to do this special on the Vatican Library, and to see books that you will never see in your life, because they're in archives. They are 1,000 years old or even more. Anyway, it's fascinating. It's an inside look at what is happening in there. But another funny story that happened is, the way 60 Minutes works is that there are a number of correspondents. These are very, very senior correspondents. So you would never see me going on the air. Although you'll hear my voice on the radio, you won't see me at 60 Minutes because it's only the same correspondents all the time. Now, the person who was involved in the Vatican Library was a very, very well-known CBS correspondent, no longer with us anymore. His name was Morley Safer. He used to love Italy. He was in Italy all the time. And, he even covered the Assisi earthquake, when the Basilica of Assisi collapsed. He was always here. He was always at the American Academy of Arts. He was someone who loved art and culture, and that's why he was here. And when I suggested to him, because I was the one who proposed doing the Vatican Library, and he said, oh yes, of course. So after this huge negotiation and getting 3 days to be able to film there, he arrives. And the day before the shoot, he's hit by a taxi. And I thought, okay, well, we have a problem, because he basically fell and he was all black and blue. And I thought, well, I can't have a correspondent who's black and blue in the face do interviews with cardinals and show the Vatican Library, right? So I thought, oh my God, what are we gonna do? It was like a terrible situation. And then I was talking to my colleagues, the cameraman and the soundman. Anyway, we thought, let's try with a makeup artist. So just like you do in film, you know, you can completely change somebody's face. So every morning before our shoot, he would get up and he would have an hour and a half with a makeup artist who would completely redid and covered his black and blue face. And if you see that show, which is still, you can find it, you will still see the correspondent Morley Safer and his face looks perfect. It was like Elephant Man transformed, you know? Fantastic. So, you know, television, you could do a lot of course, if he had been hit in the head and wasn't thinking, it would have been, but I mean, we were actually able to do that shoot, even though he had been hit by a taxi and had bruises all over his face. So, you know, things happen like this, you know. The very, very first story that I did from Italy, and I don't know if you guys will remember this, was the disaster of Cavallese. There was 4 US Marines in a plane, and in Cavallese there was an air, you know, one of these ski lifts, a cable car, and the American Marines were in their plane and they were like joyriding, and they hit with the plane the cable and clipped the cable car wire, and the cable car crashed to the ground, and everybody on board, I think it was 23 people, died. So I spent a couple of weeks in Cavallese with the main pilot, his name is Richard Ashby, talking about this, and he was claiming, oh, no, it wasn't on the US maps, but the reality is that more than 20 people lost their lives, and, you know, what happened up there, they only know. But what happens in a case like this with the United States is that because they are military officials, they get sent back to the United States to be tried. So they get taken back to the US and Italy. There are agreements that that's the way things go. And another similar case, and maybe some of you will recall this, was when an Italian journalist in Iraq, Giuliana Sgrena, was killed. There was also another situation that there was an American involved, an American military official. He also was sent back to the United States because he was military. So this is just to say that the United States is very, very careful about looking after its own citizens. Much more so, even though we have a justice system in this country that is very, very fair with 3 levels of judgment, but, and it's maybe a little bit less fair in the United States. A very, very big case, and then I just want to tell you about this one, and then I'm going to open to any questions you may have. I don't know if you've ever heard of a man called Chico Forti. He was a very, very famous windsurfer, Italian from the north of Italy, around the area of Trento. He has been in prison now in the United States for over 20 years, and for a murder. It is believed, and I did a story for one of our news programs that I talked to you about before, which is 48 Hours, Murder Mystery, the one I worked for, Amanda Knox. On that same show, I did an hour about Chico Forti. Now, Chico Forti is an Italian who has been in prison for so many years, and he has always professed his innocence. He claims he did not commit that murder. If you ask me personally, I don't think he did, and I've studied the case very, very carefully. The United States has said to the previous government, to our foreign minister Di Maio, that they would send him back, and he was given a life sentence, so they would send him back to Italy so that he could continue with his life sentence in Italy. This has not happened yet. we shall see what will happen. But the reality is that Italy sends US nationals back easier than the United States sends them here. However, we do have another case in Italy at the moment of two young Americans, and you will definitely recall this, Finnegan Elder and the other guy's name, Gabriele, I don't know what, I forget his name at the moment. But anyway, they were involved in stabbing a policeman one night in Rome. And obviously they were caught immediately and they're in prison now. And in fact, they have also been given very harsh sentences. It's not over, the process. They should rule, the High Court should rule, I think this month or early next month. But I can't see it very likely that they will return to the United States very soon, although, having said that, you know, a life sentence in this country is not the same as a life sentence in the US. In the US, if you get life, you stay in prison. In this country, if you get life, the chances are that after 16 years, you're out. So, depending on many things. But anyway, it's very interesting also to understand how the different judicial systems work in different countries. You know, and you guys, I know, study governance. It's very interesting to look into the legal frameworks of different countries. Anyway, I won't keep going because I could go on forever with all my stories, but if you have any questions. Anybody got any questions? I'm happy to take any questions from you. Hi.
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 I'm Alice Esteri, and I would like to ask a kind of more personal question.
Yeah.
So, has it been difficult for you as a woman, your path or career as a journalist? And did you start in Italy and then went working in the US, or how has it been?
Okay, so I was in Italy until I was 8 years old, and then my family moved to Spain. I was always at an English school, and I then went to study in England. I went to the London School of Economics, and so I had a very foreign background. Although I'm Italian and both my parents are Italian, I grew up abroad. So when I worked for a couple of years in London and then came back to Italy and wanted to get into journalism. And I spoke 4 languages, and I went to RAI, and they asked me who was supporting me. Chi mi raccomandava? And I said, no one. And they said, so what are you doing here? I was so depressed. I mean, I thought this can't be true, you know? You know, you're full of enthusiasm, you're young, you've studied at a very good school, you speak a lot of languages. It's not a very nice thing to hear, right? And it would have never happened in England, because it just doesn't work like that in an Anglo-Saxon country. But anyway, fast forward, I did get a short contract at RAI, and then I started working at Vatican Radio, which had, at the time, all programs in every language possible. And I worked on the English news desk, and it was a fantastic school. They taught me a lot of things. They paid me very badly, but they taught me a lot of things. The gavetta, as we call it. But that allowed me to do my journalist state exam in this country, and I worked there for a while, and then a very good friend who worked for CBS was leaving and going back to Los Angeles, And she said, oh, I think you're really very good and you should come and work. But anyway, I mean, I have chosen not to leave CBS because I love CBS and CBS is a great network to work for. However, I have worked for Al Jazeera, BBC, Radio France, I mean, across the board, everybody that, Voice of America. My situation with CBS is that I have a non-exclusive contract so that I am able to even do a documentary for anybody I want, you know? So as a woman, I don't think it's been harder than as a man. I think that, there are some differences, but in this profession, I think there are a lot of women. Maybe not so many women holding positions of power, but there's a lot of women who can be journalists and very good journalists. Yeah?
Hi. At some point you said that CBS is a trustable and a reliable source, but how can we be so sure? Because there's many ways to interpret one story. And recently in the Ukrainian mass media, there was a backlash of a few major platforms such as BBC and Deutsche Welle when they used Russian propaganda narrative in covering a story.
Yes, well, as I said to you before, we need to base our news, our reliability is based on our news sources, and our news sources have to be checked. However, that does not mean that we do not lean more towards being pro-Ukrainian than pro-Russian, okay? But one thing is the reliability of the information you are providing and making sure that the sources that are giving you that information are good, reliable, trustworthy. Another thing is that there always is a slant, particularly in news like this. I mean, people could be saying, well, this is not very trustworthy at all. I mean, who's to say that Putin is such a bad guy? I mean, we're listening only to one side of the story. I mean, obviously we are giving a lot of attention to the Ukraine in a good way and to Russia in less of a good way. But the thing is that there are also people in Russia that are unhappy with this war, but nobody talks about them. And they're not allowed a voice, but there are. Yeah, I have friends in Russia,
Okay, I think it's my turn. I'm Ludovico Benicelli, and I'm GG2, a global governance student of the second year. And actually, I want to ask more than just one question.
Sure.
I'm really passionate about journalism, that the path I want to take, and still I'm
What?
journalism.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Still, I'm a little bit skeptical about the role of journalism in the future, because, and I just want to ask, what do you think about its role? It's gonna disappear? It's gonna to change its role in our society? Because I think that it's changing in the last year, also in the quality, and yeah, I'm very skeptical about this matter. And then the second question is, what do you suggest if in the future I want to do this job? Which could be the right path? I mean, in terms of studying and experiences and so on. Thank you.
So I think that, yes, of course, the role of journalism has very much changed. I mean, the fact that we have social media at the moment has made it a huge difference. I mean, certainly it wasn't like that when I was a young person. There was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, Twitter, anything like that. I mean, my radio reporting today is with my phone, and I describe whatever is going on, and the quality is fabulous. And I can even shoot pictures fantastically, so anybody can be a journalist if you like. You just need to be at the right place at the right time and show, but I mean, I don't think that it's a dying industry. I mean, yes, people don't read the newspapers as much because you don't need to buy the newspaper. You can see the newspaper on your tablet or on your phone. And so I think in answer also to your second question, that someone who wants to be a journalist today needs to be able to do everything. You can't just think, oh, I'm just going to be a good writer. No, you need to be a good writer. You need to be a good shooter. You need to be a good talker. You need to do it all, you know, and you need to, and I don't know how to do it all, but, you know, if you have all those qualities, like, you know, how to edit, you're able to do a lot of things. You can sell yourself very well. So, and I think one of the main ingredients for a journalist is curiosity. So if you're a curious person, and get out there, go and talk to people, let them tell you things. You're there to be their voice. So you really need, you know, go to a school that also teaches you across platforms. That's what I would suggest. Well, I think we have one of the best news agencies in the world today, which is ANSA. Without a shadow of a doubt, I think it's number 4 in the world, you know, after Reuters, Associated Press, and maybe Agence France-Presse. You know, if you got the opportunity to do an internship, and they even do them here at Associated Press. Now I don't know if as much as in the past, but, or go and do an internship at Reuters. I mean, that's a fantastic experience that can take you in many different directions. The head of Reuters today is a friend of mine called Alessandra Galloni, and she's Italian. And she's started here. You know, she worked at Reuters, she worked at AP, and today she heads Reuters. So, you know, get out there and do things and work across platforms. Go ahead, talk.
Good morning. I'm Davide. So, considering your background in all over the world, basically, I would like to ask you a question. So, how is Italian press different from, maybe Italian and European press different from American one? Also, considering its way of exposing the news and its role in the society. Thank you.
You know, I find personally, I mean, I wanted to talk to you guys about world news because I think in the United States, there's not very much world news. I mean, today we saw that in fact there were 2 pieces of news, one from Italy, one from the UK, 2 global reports, but then the rest was American news related maybe to, you know, their presidents, their inside politics, domestic politics, and obviously there was a lot of Ukraine coverage. I think Italy also suffers from a lack of looking at some areas of the world, which does not mean Europe. Italy covers Europe a lot, but other parts of the world are sometimes forgotten like they don't exist. Africa, poor thing, seems like it doesn't exist as a planet. But obviously Africa exists and there's a lot going on in Africa. So I think one of the main problems in some countries is forgetting parts of the world.
Thank you for your speech, first of all. My name is Francesca Primavilla. I'm a second-year student too, and I have a question, of course. So I would like to know, from your perspective, of course, how the world of journalism has changed from the beginning of your career until now. And in particular, I'm referring to freelance, that has become a big thing, that has been discouraging many quality journalism and quantity over quality, and I wanted to know what's your perspective and where everything is heading towards now during these big titles and very poor quality at the end. Thank you.
I think it's changed. I mean, I hate to say this, but I've been doing this for a long time, more than 30 years, and it has changed hugely because, you know, obviously there was no social media, but I remember that initially I started with radio, and I used to go around with this big, it was called a Nagara. It was a tape recorder that used to have two wheels like this, and if anybody made a mistake, or even if I made a mistake, you had to cut the tape and then stick it and cut the piece out. It was like, and it weighed like, I mean, I used to break my back carrying that thing. And today we have like these mini tape recorders or this phone. I can tape you and you'll sound perfect and your broadcast quality. And, you know, people used to carry huge cameras all over the world. I mean, for 60 minutes, we were traveling with huge cases of equipment. And, you know, now you can shoot an entire story with small cameras. You can travel very lightly. You can be anywhere. Also, what's changed a lot is how to broadcast. We would go, say, to Afghanistan, and then we would have to carry all the tapes back. And now we can just use satellite to transmit everything. And so obviously the news has become much faster than before. Before, everything used to take a huge amount of time. Yeah. I need to speak to that guy there because he's been wanting to speak. You, because he's been raising his hand a lot. Hi. Yeah, well, I don't have much of an opinion, really. I mean, whoa, I mustn't put myself here. No, I mean, really, the 2016 elections, what do you want me to say? I mean, I wasn't there. I think it was craziness. I don't know. I don't know what to say, really. I mean, I think that certainly Russia had some sort of a role, but I'm not well enough prepared to be able to comment properly for you. How many? Yeah, I can't hear you properly.
Okay. Deep polarization in the American society right now, that it's too much divided right now, that America is more divided than ever.
Yeah, the US is certainly very, very divided. And, you know, people feel very differently about things, but that's not very dissimilar to this country. I mean, we've had years and years of governance from the left or center left, and you know, we've never had such a right-wing government as we will probably have this time. I think that people want to be able to choose something different. And I think, yes, the US is divided. I think Italy is divided as well. I think the same thing happened in Britain. I think it's a natural, you know, when people are unhappy, they go the other way.
Thank you.
Guys, I would take your questions forever, but can I just tell some people that I'm here still and maybe another 10 minutes so that, because they're waiting for me. Hang on. I'm just gonna write a message if you don't mind. You go ahead and ask your question.
Hi.
Hi. Go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Ada, and I wanted to ask you, have you ever experienced censorship in your career? For example, your superiors saying you cannot publish a certain part of the news, and if so, how did you deal with it?
I have never experienced that. I have experienced, though, something different, which is being asked to be a spy. Basically, sometimes journalists you're in a very convenient position as a journalist. You're able to ask a lot of questions, and nobody really questions why you're asking the questions. So it can happen that you can be approached, and offered money to work for a particular government. Obviously, I didn't accept. I'm still here. But I mean, it can happen. But I have not had that issue happen to me.
Good morning, I am Gis Lamingo, a dual degree student between a French university and global governance. And my question is more related to the link between journalism and war. And do you think that journalism could still be considered as a neutral instrument faced to wars that tend nowadays to be a more hybrid declination? Thank you.
More?
Hybrid declination. Hybrid, sorry.
So if journalism could be considered more...
Like, if journalism can still be neutral faced to wars that have more communication instruments rather than conventional.
So more neutral, you think?
Yes, is journalism neutral?
Now that there are more instruments.
That's, yes.
Yeah. I think, you can always use journalism to twist things, and if you have someone who is prepared to publish your story twisting it, then you could change things, But I think if you want to be a good journalist, really, you have to be able to give both sides of the story. I mean, and that, as you said, is not always possible, because in some way or another, you're always leaning to one side or the other. But I think one should try to maintain some sort of balance and to take a step back from the story, not to involve yourself in the story. You should just tell that story and be honest about telling that story, but not try to take sides with one particular side. And yes, I think the fact that, you have more instruments today does help. The fact that you can shoot and you can see things much easier, you can go to places much faster. I think these are things that can help in being an honest storyteller. Are we good? No.
Sorry. Okay, good morning. I have two questions for you. I'm Marici, and my first question is how to be unique and have a distinctive voice in this world that has like several newspapers, like many news even on Instagram, so from not like specific websites. And what is the process to decide which news has the priority on a world scale level? Thank you. Which is the process behind choosing what is the new that is going to be shown in the website in a world scale level?
To answer your second question first, I think that the process that decides is what one thinks is going to get the most attention of the audience, the readership. So something that is very much affecting us. Example, climate change is affecting our world, whether we like it or not. That is something that people want to know about. If it's, what's going to happen? Is it going to get worse? Is something being done? What more can be done? People go out and demonstrate and march because they feel not enough has been done. So yes, I think that stories that have a direct impact on our lives are certainly being chosen for those front pages. And sorry, what was your first question again? Oh, how to be unique. Yeah, well, I think that if you tell a story that people don't know about and that has an impact, an importance on lives of a community, I think that that is making your story unique, your reporting unique. So I'm always trying to find something that people don't know about, a story that I think, sometimes people come to me, like at the moment I'm working on a story that people don't know about. Okay, it's not been published. There's a book that has been written. The book has not been published yet. I've been given this book and I'm shocked by this book, but I need to study it. I need to understand everything. I need to check it, because although the author has obviously gone to their sources, if I want to do a television story, I need to do my own fact checking. So, but I think it's going to have a huge impact when that comes out, okay? Because it has to do with my country, it has to do with the United States, and it has to do with the church. So there's a lot going on there. Okay. All right, I'm gonna thank you very much. If there's any more, do you have a last question? Last question, because then I have to go to my friends who are waiting for me. It's been great to see you all. All right.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So my name is Eli Malizia, and my question is most related to the infodemic phenomenon, or in general for a reader, the problem of managing a great flux of information, and because this having a massive flux of information
is a problem.
Dramatically affects our way to spread our attention over a massive quantity of contents. I think a certain kind of journalism like that can be represented with formats like 60 minutes are extremely useful, because there's a little lapse of time, and it's not every day. It's not every day, but
sometimes the problem is that if you get a short information, you're not getting in depth. But maybe one solution is you do get a little newscast that gives you a little information.
Yeah.
Then if there's something that you want to get more information of, you go to a second place that provides more in-depth information.
Yes. My question is, what broadcasting platforms and newspapers could do in order to limit this particular behavior, and if there are certain strict limits, what it's possible to do? What kind of policy we can put in advance in a public field, if there's any, obviously.
Well, I think already, for example, there's so much information. A lot of our information. I mean, personally, I receive about 600 to 800 email messages every day. Okay. So I spend the first 2 hours of my morning pretty much erasing what I don't need, and then putting some emails into a separate place so that I know I need to look at those. That's very time consuming. So there are people who already organize that ahead of, I don't, maybe I should, who already have certain go into a different box that they don't look at all, okay? Now, when you're receiving 600 emails a day, and I'm just a journalist, but I'm sure there are people receiving many more than that. It's very, very difficult, but you need to put, as you say, some blocks on certain things that you're not interested in. That needs to be put in place, because otherwise the large quantities of information are not letting you do your job properly, because you're spending too much time trying to filter through what's good and what's not good. So yes, that is certainly an issue. Thank you very much, everybody. I wish you all good luck with whatever you want to do. Make sure you find a job that you like, though, because you have to spend so much time doing.